Alright, so chapter 9.5, as you can see, again, is a 1 day lesson. We'll save the 2 or 3 day lesson for after break. Again, this is the last lesson before we take a week off. Um, Overall, describe material that is not pertinent to many topics that you'll see in math. Now, again, I didn't say that it's not important. I said it only pops up every once in a while. But don't allow my honesty, because I'll never lie to you, to make you ignore the importance of your training, because it is important. It just doesn't show up a lot. There are some topics coming up at some point that if you don't know how to do it, you have no shot. So at least try to get an idea about it. That way that when it does pop up, you can at least bring it back to your memory. The way math works typically, which is why I don't worry a lot about all that stuff, is once you learn something and you figure it out and then you forget it, when it comes back in front of you, as long as you figure it out one time, then you'll be able to work your way back to it another time. It might be some frustration, but again, typically in math, once you can deal with the frustration, you're okay. So we are here to learn one process, and it's very difficult to explain in terms of the methods behind everything, but it's a process that's pretty much based in muscle memory. So the easiest way to do it is just get right to it. So completing the square on each problem here, what we will do here is we will take this problem, x squared plus 10x plus 15, and the first thing we will want to do what we call completing the square, which is rewriting it into a different form, is we want our x's to be isolated. So we are going to separate our x's by simply putting parentheses around the x portions. Now, again, this looked like one equation or one expression. Now what we have is x squared and 10x in its own group, and we have 15 waiting on the outside. What we are going to do is, to complete the square, we're going to add a value to this, and so we have to prepare for adding that value by adding blanks. Now here is the reason why we add two blanks. This is an expression, or this is an expression. Like I said, it's still got the same value. You've got x squared plus 10x plus 15, but we are going to add a number to this expression. When you add a number to this expression, we just do off the balance. So if this x squared, 10x, and 15 weighed 50 pounds, and we added 6 pounds, now it weighs 56 pounds. The only way to offset that is to subtract 6 pounds, because 56 plus, or sorry, 50 plus 6 is 56, minus 6 is back to 50. So you will add a plus blank and a minus blank to your problem as you prepare for the new value. So again, we started out here, we separated our x's, we then added a blank to the inside of the parentheses, and we added the opposite blank to the outside of the parentheses because we're adding the value here, so we have to offset it by subtracting it out here. And then the last thing we do is complete the square. Now completing the square is simple. You simply take this value here and this sign and cut it in half, so that would be plus 5, and you put that into a parentheses as x plus 5 squared. Again, hard to explain, but just trust the muscle memory here. So again, you bring down your x plus 5 squared. Now again, what we just did is we're going to take this 5 and square it. 5 squared is 25. Again, this 5 came from cutting this 10 in half, but since we are squaring it, we take the 5 and square it, and that number goes here. Since we just added 25, we then take that 25 and put it over here. This is the same as that, because if you remember, it would be x times x, which is x squared, x times 5, which is 5x, x times 5, which is 5x. Those two make 10x. 5 times 5, 25. We'll see what happens with that in a second. But this now needs to be simplified, so you then take positive 15 minus 25, which is negative 10. And that is your value completed, or that is the process of completing the square for that part there. So again, taking this part, separate your x's, prepare for some blanks, so add a blank and then subtract a blank, cut this number in half with the sign, of course, square that number, put the other number over here, combine these two values, and that is it. Just to show that we didn't change anything at all, let's start from here. And as I said, and I'm not going to do this with all of them, but just to show you that we didn't do anything, we just gave it a facelift, as I like to say. It's the same problem, it's just in a different form. Remember that x plus 5, remember squared means multiplied by itself, so I'm sorry, I just accidentally hit up. Remember the squared means you're going to multiply by itself, so we're going to do x plus 5, right? Then you do x times x, which is x squared, x times 5, which is 5x, 5 times x, which is 5x, 5 times 5, which is 25, and minus 10 comes along for the ride. And when you go to put your terms together, your x squared stays, 5x and 5x make 10x, positive 25, negative 10 make plus 15, and if you look at it, it is the same exact thing. So again, it is muscle memory. Main thing you want to do, if you want to add in your notes, if you're writing this, is draw an arrow from the 10 to the 5 and put 1/2 right there, because again, all you're doing is taking this number, cutting it in half, and then circle this number and draw an arrow back to 25, because that's where this number comes from. The number that you cut in half squared gives you this number here, and then of course if you want to draw an arrow from here to here, and that gives your other number. So pretty much it's kind of like diving into a pool and coming out. So you dive in, come back out, and end up over here. That is the completing the square process. Again, it's more like muscle memory than anything else, but it's not as bad as what it looks once you actually practice it a little bit. So again, the first thing we want to do is isolate the x's. So we do that. We know we're going to add a value, so we will prepare for our new values by adding a blank in here and subtracting that same blank out here. And this is where the process starts. Again, to complete the square, we take this number here and cut it in half. Notice that's a -8, so -8 cut in half should be -4, but we're going to square it. So again, 8 cut in half is 4. Square that 4 to make 16, and if I put a 16 here, I put a 16 over there. Last thing I do is put these two numbers here together to get -14. Yes, it's going to be weird at first, but again, once you actually practice a little bit, you'll get it right. Because again, as long as you don't go into this, I think a lot of you have the problem of you look at something and you think there's no way I can do this, and once you say that, your brain won't accept it because you just told your brain there's no way you can do it. Instead of just saying, if I work at it, I can get it, or if I practice it enough, I can get it, because anybody can do this. You just got to practice it enough. I was just having a discussion with my wife, who teaches first grade, about some of the parents who were out teaching her and making her look like she doesn't know what she's doing because they're teaching stuff that she normally wouldn't teach. And I said that you could teach a second, first, third grader anything you want. The thing is, they wouldn't understand it and they wouldn't be ready for it. Now, they could do the process. I could teach this process to a third grader, but they wouldn't understand it. They wouldn't really comprehend what it was being used for, but they could do the process. And you could teach anybody to draw some parentheses to separate the x squared and 14x. You can teach anybody after they do that to put a plus and a minus. You can teach anybody to say, okay, now that you've done that, take this number, cut it in half, and put a squared on the outside. Take this number, multiply by itself. As long as they know how to multiply, I guess you could teach that level. And that's what, third grade? So anyway, 49 there. If you put a 49 there, you must put a 49 there. You then take these numbers here and you put them together to get -56. And again, I'm pretty sure some of you are thinking you're just talking crazy because you think everything's easy. No, there are 6 and 7-year-olds who are playing complex pieces of music, and you can't tell me that someone can take 10 fingers and play something so spectacular without a little bit of practice. Now, of course, they didn't just sit down at the piano and do it, but they trained themselves to do it. And so what I'm saying is, if you train this, you'll get it. And so there's really no excuse as to not to get it outside of you just don't want to get it. But again, separate, add the blanks, bring down x minus 7, put your squared, square that number, put it over here, put these two numbers, they go together right there. I think this is the last one. So again, separate your x's, add your blanks, look at this number here, plus 6 becomes plus 3. 3 turns into again, you're squaring that 3, that's your hint, you're squaring that, which becomes a 9. If I put a 9 there, I must put a 9 there, and -7 and -9 work together to make -16. That's it. Again, it's a simple process, it's a very direct process. You just have to make sure that you practice it. So if you notice, this week was all about direct processes. It was about quadratic formula, which is plug in the numbers to the formula, plug and chug, get your answers. Just make sure you're careful. I think yesterday, I forget what yesterday was, because I'm just like that. I don't know. Let's see. It was solving using algebra, which was again pretty direct. You move the numbers away. You get down to x squared. You square root both sides. You make sure you put a positive and negative version of that answer. And so, in terms of streamlining your work, there's no need to separate the second and third step. I'll tell you that right now. Ignore that negative 82. I just didn't do my job yet. But again, as you isolate the x's, simply add the blanks, and this is what Math Excel expects on your work. So going back to what I'm talking about, there is no need for this. So on your paper for Math Excel, you'll go straight from here to here, because when you do this step, there's no need for you to not add the blanks since you're separating them anyway. So just put parentheses plus 6x and then plus blanks, as you'll see that I'll put here. So if we were doing this really quickly, again, you would separate, put your x squared minus 18x, but I know I'm going to separate with blanks, so I just add my blank now, minus 1 minus blank. I then put x minus 9 squared, and that's where I messed up and forgot to make that show up. But anyway, plus 81 minus 81, which is where your minus 82 came from. So this is what you'll type into Math Excel, and I'll do a couple of them before I quit this video just to make sure. How is this useful? Well, if you were asked to graph this parabola and you don't like the form of the negative b over 2a and then making a 5-point chart, you could actually just complete the square by adding the blanks. Turning this to x minus 2, if you remember, take the 4, cut it in half. 2 squared turns into 4. If you put a 4 there, you put a 4 over there. Positive 7, negative 4 make positive 3. And I think the week before, or last week sometime, we were talking about graphing parabolas, where this tells us to go 2 to the right and 3 up. So again, this converts it to what we call vertex form. So we know the vertex goes 2 to the right and 3 up, which means the vertex is 2, 3. And because of the M concept, that was where we were talking about A and C or whatever, where the value attached to x squared was your kind of like a slope. Since that's 1, we know it goes over 1 and up 1 from the vertex. So if you were graphing this, again, you go 2 right, 3 up, put a dot, that's your vertex, and then over 1, up 1, over 1, up 1, and that could be your actual shape of the parabola that you're talking about. So notice how much work we didn't have to do to graph this parabola in terms of doing the negative, because if you think back to what we did before, we did negative b over 2a. We found the value to be whatever it was. We put that in the center of a 5-point chart. We then had to plug it, that value and four other values into this formula, plot all the points, or get all the points, plot the points, and draw the shape. If you practice this enough, and you'll notice doesn't take a long time to get from here to here as long as you know how to do it, which means that the time is saved converting this to this section here. Now here's the problem. It doesn't really work if that's an odd number, because you don't really want to deal with x minus 5 halves or x minus 3 and a half or whatever right there. But like I said, it's useful. It's just not absolutely useful. But in certain situations, it does make your life easier. So what is your assignment over spring break? I know I said it's spring break, but again, this is to help you out. If you remember the following process, you have no assignment. If not, you should go back and watch the videos 8.5a, 8.5b, c, and 8.7. They're all in your Edpuzzle still. They're still available to you. It's the one where we took 3x squared minus 14x plus 8, and we said we're looking for numbers that multiply to be 24 and add to be negative 14. We then made a tree for 24, which is 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6. We then realized that the only way you get a negative 14 by adding is if this side is negative, and at the same time the only way you multiply to get a positive 24 is if both of these are negative. So we put a negative there. We then look for the ones that make negative 14, which is negative 2 and negative 12. We then take our 14 and split it to be negative 2x, negative 12x. That came from these numbers. We then separate this down the middle. Sorry about that. I keep hitting the wrong arrow. I'm not doing this with a remote control like I usually do. But you split it, and then remember we factor the GCF out of this. No number comes out of 3 and 2, but both of these have an x. So you take off an x, and you're left with 3x minus 2. Again, I'm not going slowly through this because we were supposed to know this. Plus, I warned you, I think, 3 weeks ago to make sure you were close to this. We always copy the sign. 12 and 8 both have a 4 in it, and 3x minus 2 comes out. Plus, I told you that usually copies anyway. And then we end up with 3x minus 2 times x minus 4. So again, if you have this process still in your memory somewhere, don't worry about it, because again, if it's at least in your memory, you don't need to be perfect when class starts again Tuesday after spring break. Again, remember, it would have been next week and Monday, so I'm not going to break that rule. We're going Tuesday of the week after spring break. But on Tuesday, you will not have to really be perfect at this, because you'll be going through the process enough that it'll come back to your memory. But some of you don't even know how to get from here to here, or from here to here. And so that's the people who should be watching this, to make sure you at least have it in your head. Again, perfection is not necessary, but if that's at least still in your memory somewhere. Also remember, there were shortcut parts and other things that we knew how to do also, so just kind of keep that in mind. So what I'm going to do is work through one or two Math Excel problems for you real quick, just to make sure you can see what you're supposed to do, and then that'll be it. So again, they want you to complete the square. So the first blank is where we will separate and add our blank. So minus 14x. I'm not going to add the blank. Instead, what I'm going to do is put x minus 7 squared, because otherwise it's going to kind of throw me off. 7 squared means I'm going to add 49. Remember that plus 9 would have been on the outside. And then because I added 49, I want to put minus 49. And then 9 and negative 49 make negative 40. Now what you'll say is, Mr. Bradley, I can't do that fast. But if you notice, the directions say complete this square on a separate sheet of paper, then complete it by filling in the blanks. So the only two blanks, I did this just to show you, the only two blanks that I'm looking for is this without the blanks, because I want the numbers. So x squared minus 14x plus 49 plus 9 minus 49, then one separated all the way through for you to finish that up. So again, if you're good enough to do it without paper, fine, but I suggest you do, because most of you are not at that level to where you can put x squared minus 18x. And again, in your head, you might know I'm taking 18, cutting it in half and squaring it, which means that that's going to be 81. Or you could, if you want, put a real quick blank plus space parentheses plus 10, and then just leave it there. And then that way you could actually set it up that way, to where now you do your x minus 9 squared, which then puts a 81 here. Just make sure you get rid of your spaces, otherwise it messes it up. And then subtract 81 here, and 10 minus 81 is negative 71, which should wrap it up the right way. So again, I only gave you 5 of them. And again, your goal is to be fluent, not to be perfect. So just make sure that you can walk through it decently well, and you should be good enough for what this book expects of you to do, especially with us being at home and learning from home. So other than that, enjoy your weekend, enjoy your break. And again, if you do not know how to factor, or if it's not anywhere in your head, make sure you go back and watch the videos. I'm not putting homework up, because watching the videos should just bring it back to your memory, especially if now that you know what you're doing, it'll kind of stick a little bit better, because your brain knows kind of what to expect. So other than that, again, have a good weekend and week, and talk to you in, a few days.